But basically what you just heard, for way of background and introduction, I got out of law school in 1989, got a master's in early childhood development, really wanted to understand linguistics and development and how it intersected with child maltreatment. And I prosecuted for 10 years. I loved doing that work. I loved every day of it. But I'm going to not tell you today about my successes. I'm going to tell you about the lessons I learned the hard way. Because I cannot tell you how many lessons I had to learn on the backs of childhood survivors, on the backs of non-offending parents who had their own trauma, and that I was so critical of. And that I really honestly thought that if I just prosecuted and kept on prosecuting and putting people in jail, that I could solve this problem called child maltreatment. But I have come to the conclusion we're not going to incarcerate our way out of this, are we? And we're going to have to start thinking and doing something different. Now I'm going to start with telling you about my journey to become more trauma-informed. And each day I am learning how to respond in a more trauma-informed way and how not to contribute or in any way harm the children that we serve, but to make sure that we do it in a way that in the end of the day, I want kids to drive away from this cute little yellow cottage right by Audubon Park. If you're ever in New Orleans, 1101 Calhoun, come knock on our door. I want to give you a tour. We're right by Audubon Park. But I want to make sure at the end of the day, when kids drive away, I can't guarantee what's going to happen. I can't guarantee that DCFS in our state's going to have enough to protect. I can't guarantee that the local prosecutor's going to prosecute mom, dad. But what I can guarantee at the end of the day is that when they walk away, they look back at this yellow cottage as a bright spot in a dark time in their life. And I think that we're a part of that. Each and every one of you who woke up this morning and drove here on your journey is a part about making a bright spot in a dark time for the kids that we serve. Now, I left prosecution after 10 years. We had worked up to having a really high conviction rate. So I started getting to do a lot of these talks and talking to other people about how to make this happen. And what we realized, and so I want to just tell you one little story of a case that I tried in 1991. It happens to be one that I'm very, very, very connected to. I still am in touch with the survivor of this case. She actually found me on Facebook 15 years later, and now we have lunch together, and she's an adult and an amazing survivor that runs an unbelievable store with multiple locations in the New Orleans community. But on her back, on the back of that child survivor, I learned so much. So in 1991, when this child came to us, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, two children who had absolute normal medical findings, okay? No physical findings. But they gave us really compelling stories. At that time, I'm right out of law school. I've got this master's. I'll say I'm going to do this. And I'm like, I go to my supervisor. And I'm like, you don't have any evidence. You're never going to be able to convict this guy. And I'm like, well, can I roll the dice? Can I take a shot? So I looked through the DA's office, and I found someone who had won consecutively 87 cases. So I said, will you try this case with me? And he's like, that's not a good case. Well, I did a lot of flirting along the way, and I ultimately married this individual. True story. So you will notice that my name in here says Stacie Schriefer. His name is LeBlanc. I married him. But so I figured out I was going to need his help, and I needed to get his interest in this type of work, right? So we tried this case. We rolled the dice. But you know what? We're no heroes in this particular case, okay? These kids were amazingly compelling. And so when we told the jury in the end, you know, and we had picked this jury, and we had told them in the end, tell this guy to crawl back to the rock he crawled out from under, and go back there and vote right now before you even take a potty break. They came back in less than 10 minutes and found this guy guilty of 2 life sentences. But this case was not made in heaven. In this particular case, this perpetrator had actually gone to jail for a mail fraud case. And when he was leaving jail, he made a girlfriend in jail. I don't know how that happens. But in this case, his brother calls mom in my case and says, listen, he's not coming home to you. He's decided he's moving in with his new girlfriend. And I'm going to come pick up his stuff. And while she's on the phone, she says to the kids, you know what? Was he still doing that stuff to you? Because she knew for years and had never disclosed. And right then she reported it. But despite that, we believe these kids. And what I have learned, my lessons learned, is that if we believe the kids, we believe in our system, jurors will too, judges will. And that individual is serving 2 life sentences, and those kids have gained so much. Now, another lesson learned. When I finished that case, I had 5 of those jurors, and I will tell you, the jury foreman, he actually made this quote: it would take Jesus Christ to come into the courtroom and bail him out, and he didn't show up. Now, I love that man, okay? That's awesome. You don't get many. But he was actually crying when this child testified. Crying. I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. And the first thing he did, he came over and he met with me, and the first thing he told me is, you know, I want to give you some advice. I said, oh, great, I love to get advice. The judge allows me to talk to him. And he said, you know what I think you need to do is like the guys do, get a handkerchief in your pocket that matches your outfit so you can look more. And I'm like, okay, that was like fashion advice. Do you have any advice for my case? And he goes, yes, I have one piece of advice. You need to prosecute the mom. You got to go prosecute the mom. Why isn't she in jail? And I had 5 other jurors say to me, can we convict her too? Now, here's the deal. What would have happened if we'd have prosecuted the mom? What would our victim do? Recant. Yes, we know this. I didn't know this, okay? I missed the day in law school where they explained to you, oh, children are bonded to their offenders and their non-offending parents who do terrible things to them, okay? I missed that day. And by missing that day, I made tons of mistakes. But I have learned. Now, I will tell you, I left prosecution primarily because I realized that I was only going to be as good as my experts. I needed my child's statement. And then I needed to explain why a kid's disclosed. Because in this case, these kids waited 7 years. I also needed to explain why their bodies were normal. Because we tried this case in '91 before Joyce Adams, Dr. Joyce Adams, published her article, said it's normal to be normal 3 years later. And then Dr. Hager came back and said, yeah, we've done this and repeated it. It is completely normal to be normal. We rolled the dice before we had that. But I realized then that we were going to have we had to have really good child abuse pediatricians, nurse practitioners to explain how kids' bodies are normal and to give their expert opinions about why they delay and why the non-offending parents do crazy things. And that only with that would we be successful. So we published a book so that people wouldn't be afraid of kids getting these exams, and that was really how I started. That is my journey. Now, right now, in my community, when I left the DA's office, we were seeing about 500, 600 kids a year. We now average 1,500 kids a year that walk up our steps for these exams. That's crazy, because New Orleans is like a little spit compared to your community, which, by the way, it's beautiful here. All the color, it's green and hot in New Orleans right now. But what I can tell you is that once we learned the formula and we were using our child advocacy centers, our multidisciplinary teams, your wisdom, and using really good physicians and experts in, maybe even in psychology to explain how kids' bodies can be normal, why they delay, we were getting these type of convictions. And so now, in doing over 17,000 kids in the last 15 years, we've only had 6% acquittals. So this is the kind of numbers we're getting by looking at a different formula and looking at how we do it differently. Now, you guys all know, and you've probably seen this slide, I can tell you that back in the 90s when I was seeing cases, yeah, I can brag that we had a high conviction rate, but at the same time, I started counting how many people did this kid have to tell all the gory details to before it crossed my desk. And you know what? Kids were on average having to tell 14 different strangers, and at a minimum 9 different people. So I went out to Huntsville in 1990, and we were the 7th Children's Advocacy Center in the country. And so now a kid only has to tell once, and also tell maybe that pediatrician, so we can get that medical incident history. So you guys all know about how important this is. I can tell you in our community, once we tried a few of these cases where a kid recanted. Here's a child that actually recanted, and we were able to get that tape into court, and the jury convicted. After that, My conviction rate exploded. Everybody was coming in. Once they saw the videotape, we were done. We saved kids from even having to tell in an open court. So now we've expanded our services, and a lot of what we're doing is about looking at adverse childhood experiences. So in addition to our 2 forensic interview rooms in our New Orleans Center off Ottoman Park, we now have one in the Family Justice Center where we interview all the kids who witnessed domestic violence. We interview all the kids who witness homicides. I am ashamed to say that we have the highest rate of kids who witness homicides in my community of other CACs. And we now interview all kids at our Juvenile Justice Center where they're picked up on a warrant. We used to call those runaway warrants, but now instead they don't really run from their house. Most of these kids are told, get out. And they walk away or they're pushed out. So now we interview each and every kid who's missing from home, and we interview them to find out what harms did they maybe have to leave, what harms did they have to run from or escape from. And we look at it differently. As a result, we have identified more trafficking cases than in our entire state, and we have a model pilot as a result of doing this. Now, you asked me to come here today to give you an update of ACEs. I don't want to be too basic for you guys, so how many of you, just by a show of hands, I'm not going to ask you how many of you have an ACE score, all right? But how many of you have heard about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study? Okay, awesome. So we're going to get to rush right through this. All right, so most of you guys have heard it. Now, I will tell you, if you get the opportunity to go into communities, I do a ton of training, Last year, I talked to 8,700 people in my community. I asked them, have they heard of this? And I do it in a study, a pre and a post. It is less than 5% who have heard of it. So this is probably the biggest public health survey ever, but that most people have never heard of. So it's really important that we use your voices, your power, your teams to communicate this to folks so that they know about it. Now, you guys all know how it was founded, right? It originally started as an obesity study. They accidentally asked the wrong question. Some TA went in there, had a bad day, read the question wrong, and instead of asking, you know, how old were you when you first had sex, they said, how much did you weigh when you first had sex? And a woman said, well, I don't know, let me think about it. I think I was 40 pounds. And they're like, wait, 40 pounds? That's a prepubescent weight. But then lo and behold, 50% of people in this obesity study reported, a whopping 50% reported they had been sexually abused. And they're like, what's going on between sexual abuse and obesity? So then they looked at other adverse childhood experiences and they realized this stuff connected. And then they realized that it actually was causing this accumulation of adverse childhood experiences was causing disrupted neurodevelopment. I call this the logo. This is the logo of ACEs, right? Social, emotional, cognitive impairment, adaptation of health risk behaviors, disease, obesity, and early death. And this has been repeated in every state and been shown that it is really, really common. And so we know in helping professionals, not just in Kaiser Permanente where this started, which is an upper middle class educated people with insurance, 50% had been sexually abused. But in communities like this, helping professionals, ACE scores tend to be very high. And so, and what they looked at, what are the ACEs? What are they? And so what we typically focus on in our work in children's advocacy centers is the physical abuse, is the sexual abuse, is the witnessing domestic violence. But here it is. I realized, this was a light bulb moment in my life. I realized as a prosecutor, doing what I thought was God's work, and I loved it, and I still love it, and I miss it, okay? But here's the deal. I was doing what? I was incarcerating a parent. And what's another ACE? Having a parent who's incarcerated. So I realized at some point I was adding an ACE. Now, I'm not saying I still like a little bit of jail time. I love when somebody gets handcuffed. It makes me really happy. Doesn't happen in my CAC, but sometimes I walk to the parking lot just to watch it. So I have to confess that, okay? But I don't let the kids see it. I just want everybody to know, okay? I don't let the children see it. Because we know that that's an adverse childhood experience. And we know that so many of us get into this work because we have this experience. and because of your resiliency, you're here. Now, I kind of think this is sort of like duh science. I used to always say when I first read about this, I had the opportunity to be on a panel with Dr. Andy Folletti out at the National, I can't remember what it's the conference in San Diego, NIEPV, not the Chadwick conference, the other one, Dr. Geffner, I'm going blank on a word. But when I was sitting there with him, I'm like, duh, yeah, we all know that. Bad things happen to your kid, bad things happen as an adult. But they have now proved it, okay, that absolutely there's this connection, that these adverse childhood experiences. And now they've looked at all the states, including New Jersey, including Louisiana. Now, let me ask you guys a question. So the CDC has basically said people have high A scores. People typically have, in all communities across, they're having an A score of 1 or more, all right? Now, we're really, really high. And the CDC has come out and said that there is this significant correlation. We got to do something. We got to do something different. We got to look at this differently. And that it's critical to understand how these things are connected, and then how can we go further upstream. Now, let me ask you guys a question. And we don't have much time for questions today, but what do you think, or do you guys know, what is the average A score, the average score, the accumulation of these traumas in New Jersey? Anybody know? Anybody want to guess where you guys rank? Do you think you're going to be high A score, your kids have a lot of trauma in your state, or you think you're going to have a low A score? High. How many hands go for high? How many hands go for low? We've got 2 people correct. You have the lowest A score in the country. The lowest A score. Now, did you know that? And you're like, how can that be? So here's my deal. Don't get a job in Louisiana, okay? Because we have, guess what? The highest A score. Here you go. So we love to be low ranking. And if anybody's from Mississippi, I don't mean to insult you in any way, but in Louisiana, we're really thankful for Mississippi because we can own second to last, okay? So if you're from Mississippi, I apologize in advance. But now here's the deal, what you need to know. You also own another honor, okay? And I know you're busy and you're like, this can't be true. We have high A scores. You actually are acknowledged as having the lowest rate, okay? The lowest rate overall, but the greatest variation in household income level. The greatest variation. Which means you have the biggest disparity. Now, I didn't have to tell you guys that. You probably already know that, right? You're like, yeah, okay, now you're talking about what we really know. Because you're serving these guys, right? You're serving the ones with the high A scores, right? And these are the people in your community that are like, I don't know what you all talk about. Our neighborhoods are fine, right? So you have this big disparity, which makes you incredibly unique as a state. You own this, okay? And it's good to know. It's good to know. The other thing I want you to know is that a parent served in jail, this is an ACE, you have the lowest. There's another thing. The other thing that you're the lowest on is a child who witnesses neighborhood violence. We're owning that. And you're like, no, not true. So, yeah. And you guys are going to have to call these up. Here they are. It is overview of adverse childhood experiences among the U.S. So here they are. I have the resource for you. I want you to call them up and say they got it all wrong, all right? Because you're looking at me like I'm crazy, right? And I didn't make these slides up. I promise you I couldn't do this if I tried. But I mean, I couldn't even make this graphic. I just put little arrows there, okay? I promise. I didn't touch this, all right? This is what's out there, all right? And you're like, that's crazy. Now, there could be a couple of issues. It could be that people don't know about these ACEs, and they're not filling out these surveys. And so as a result, you don't have the ability to get more grant funding and to do all this great, to get more attention. So good to know, right? So what other research supports all this ACE study? It's not just looking at New Jersey and looking at all the different states. They've actually proved now that this toxic stress, all these adverse childhood experiences, actually changes kids' brains. They're looking at brains. It's not just like this soft science stuff. The brain is changing. There's less gray matter. So we take kids who've been all traumatized, and then what we do, we give them longer school days, because that's going to help. But instead, we have to give them more trauma-informed care, right? More evidence-based therapeutic services, that we can stop this. And did you also know, so pediatric is that we got to screen for these ACEs in pediatric settings. The other thing I think is amazing, did you know it actually changes your DNA? Have you guys heard about this? Anybody heard about this? What does it change? Anybody know? Telomeres, thank you, yes. So telomeres, so my explanation of a telomere, all right, this is my attorney explanation. It's like the cap on the end of your shoelace. So think about the cap on the end of your DNA. You know that little cap on the end of your shoelace? If it starts to unravel, what happens to your shoelace? It unravels, right? So what they've figured out is that this is like an aging process. As you age, your telomere shortens. And if we can stop the degradation of telomeres, because they have shown that these experiences, these toxic experiences, actually cause that telomere to shorten. So that's your DNA. So it's changing your brain, changing your DNA, and changing your health outcomes. And so, and then learn that, like, this is like crazy stuff. Chronic pulmonary lung disease increased by 390%. Hepatitis, 240%. Depression, 460. I mean, look at these scores. Suicide, 1,220%. And so they've now, you've seen these. I know you've all seen these. You work in this field. If you haven't seen them, just go to Got Your ACE Score, and you can see a million of these little studies, and you can put them in every presentation you do. But it's really important to understand is that what I didn't understand, and I asked Dr. Folletti, I'm like, I don't get it. So what you're saying is if a child has been sexually abused every day of her life, all right, but she doesn't have any of these other traumas, that she only has an ACE score of 1. And he goes, look, I'm not saying that that's not bad. That's bad. And it could cause bad things, because an ACE score of 1 is still an ACE score of 1. But what he said is it's the related. It's experiencing a repeated single type. Actually, what they're showing isn't as bad long term, but it's still bad. I don't want to minimize this, as the polyvictimization. Okay, so that's what ACE study's all about. And I've got to talk to Dr. David Finkelhor, and he said it's really about the polyvictimization about this. So it's about these things combined. So when I was out there, and I was on this panel with Dr. Folletti, and I actually co-presented with him another time, and I asked him again, I said, I just don't get it. It's not on this as if a child has a parent who dies. Now, if a child has a parent who dies, is that an adverse experience? Is that an adverse experience in their life? Absolutely. So why isn't it on there? And he goes, well, Stacie, think about it. What happens, like in a school, in a neighborhood, if a child has a parent who dies? What happens? They get support. What kind of support? What's it look like? What do you do if, like, in your neighborhood, if someone dies and it's your neighbor? What are you doing? Huh? I hear bring food. Yes, yes. People make casseroles, okay? They make casseroles. All right, now here's the thing. If a child has a parent who goes to jail, how many casseroles does anybody make? Not one. When that child shows up at school the next day and all the teachers and some of the students know they put that child's parent in jail last night, do people all just stop and run to that child and say, I'm so sorry that happened? That, my friends, is why these are the ACEs. And that is why having a parent. Now, if a child loses a parent and doesn't have social support, it's going to be. And it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's not bad. But it's the social support. And it's the same thing that we come together. But if someone has an addiction, people don't go gather around and say, oh, you got that heroin thing. I'm so sorry. Let me help you. I'm going to take your kids to school. There's this opiate crisis. This is so terrible. This is happening to you. That does not happen, okay? That is why these cause long-term problems. And you guys know this because you're the ones when they have ACEs that are saying, I'm sorry it happened to you. But the community at large doesn't. And I think it's our journey and it's our seed. You have to help plant the seed in all those people in New Jersey that have that score of 2 or less, okay? That they understand how difficult it is to have these high scores. And so it's incredibly important that we go on this and we figure out what we can do to help. So there's some science that tells us. And guess what it says? Social support. The casseroles, they actually help, okay? So we call it evidence-informed trauma therapy, right? We call it a therapeutic response. We have people that say do mindfulness, yoga. All of these things help. But connections and social support, you are that. You are that every day. For every kid that you correspond with, that you meet with, that you drop to eye level with, and you say, I'm so sorry this happened to you, and you let that child know for your behavior that you believe them, you plant this seed. You are that bright place. Because you can't guarantee what's going to happen. You can't guarantee the judge's going to see it your way. You can't guarantee that they're going to get an unethical defense attorney. You can't guarantee those things. But what you can guarantee is that you plant the seeds to prevent. Because even having a parent who died, we can prevent the effect, the harm. Does that make sense? And so if we start seeing it this way, so people ask all the time, well, I don't want to ask someone if they have an A score because that could be really upsetting. And pediatricians, when I tell them about, oh, it's really important to screen for these ACEs, they're like, yeah, I know, but what am I going to do about it? And I don't have time, I only have 7 minutes. But here's the deal. What they actually showed is that just asking actually helped. That just asking in an ED reduced 35% reduction in the next year of them re-seeking, the recidivism of them needing it for other help. So what you do by just asking reduces their health, improves their health and reduces the harm. And so 11% reduction in emergency room, 3% reduction in hospitalizations. So why do you think it is that just asking someone and being present and stopping what you're doing, why do you think that matters? And so there's some research that actually says it's that just being heard, even if you do nothing, okay, and you have a non-shaming and blaming response, just being present and attending actually can be the first seed. It's not all that's needed. I am in no way saying that we don't need that CBTTF at the end of the road. But just being present, that child, that survivor remembers you. You are a part of their journey. You're planting the seed. And that the many times as they can tell that story without them having that trauma response and you being present is a part of their healing. And so each and every one of you in the work you do in these CACs in this community is about this. And obviously you guys are doing something really right because you have that low A score. Now, I do want to say, I used to do these presentations and I would go in, especially with the police that I trained. So I've trained all of NOPD, 1,000 police every year, do every training, every Tuesday of my life. It's a really interesting experience. But, and sometimes I feel like I'm battered as a result of it. But here's the deal. We get their A score. They have no idea. The average score that I find, and I do like a little survey. I was going to do it with you guys, but I didn't have Wi-Fi and all that good stuff. And what we find when they do it anonymously, the average score of law enforcement in my community is a 7. A 7. So what I worry about is that we need to understand the limitation of A score. So if you don't know your A score, I like this website. There's lots of them. Your A score in and of itself is not in any way a predictor of your bad health. Okay, we want to make sure we give you that. So we want to make sure you understand it's not a crystal ball, because I know that there's possibly many of you in this room that have a high A score. But you're in these seats despite that score because of your resiliency score. Someone loved you. Someone cared for you. You had someone that believed in you. You maybe did well in school. Maybe no one believed in you, but you believed in yourself. You had something in your life that led you to believe, I can make it. And what I love about this particular website is because it gives you your resilience score. So it's really important, if you would like to, later on today, don't grab them now, there are papers that come right from this website where you can get your ACE score, but most importantly, I want you to turn that over and get your resiliency score, because I guarantee you, you guys rock when it comes to resiliency scores, okay? And I want you to focus on that, because if we just focus on the harm, we're not going to do the work. And so it's really important to understand that there are people with remarkably high ACE scores that do incredibly well. And I guarantee you, many of them are walking in and sitting in this room today. Now, I will tell you, and I don't mean to in any way get political, but I used to call this lecture Resilience Trumping ACEs with Resiliency, but I can't use the word anymore because I might offend certain portions. But this is another great site. It was there before there was anything about the name. But it's really, really important. I think it was a clever way of doing it. It's all about cards, and a lot of people like it. But really important to get that resiliency score. All right, now what can we do about this? Do you think that we can increase resiliency? Can we increase resiliency? Can we teach resiliency? Yes, absolutely. It's not all that hard. And when you really figure it out. So I got certified by Victor V, then I started a CAS program. And I go into Tulane University, and last year we started the first class, and we were going to do 30 students. And it was so amazing. I had 50 students that had been on the waiting list. So the school called me and they said, will you increase it to 50? Will you increase it to 75? I had 100 students, 100 brilliant students from across the country who wanted to learn about ACEs and resiliency. And the thing that they told me in their evaluations that they loved most was about increasing their own resiliency. So these are kids that took SATs and courses that come from really great homes and are paying really great prices to go to a really good school, all right, in a bubble in New Orleans. And literally, they wanted to know about resiliency. So they loved this. My Tulane students love this part of my lecture, that this next spring, I'm going to be covering this in 3 times and doing a workshop. And there's some really great resources. Now, we're not going to have time to cover all the great ways to teach resiliency, but really, sometimes some people always say, like, the positive power of saying no. That's not a parent saying no. That's teaching our kids to be able to say no to adults, right? That's about building resiliency. And there's so many ways that we, in powerful ways, that we have the capacity to grow and to grow resiliency as adults and as kids. Science is conclusive on this. So despite high ACE scores, we can grow resiliency. And you have the challenge of growing resiliency, especially in your impoverished neighborhoods where you have that disparity. And it can be done. So it's really important. And I love this. How do we bring resiliency into the classroom? Now, it's amazing. Look at this. Like a kid in this school actually said that they understood that they were changing their brain and that their brain could grow and heal and change. I mean, these are kids. And this is a kid, okay, after watching this and doing this, this child says there is stuff in your brain that if you take on a challenge and if you stick with it, it makes your brain smarter. It makes you smarter, said one girl. That's building resiliency. And that's how easy it is. This was just a study where they showed kids a video. How amazing is that? So great stuff. I love this. I did this. I have 2 kids. I have one in law school and one in college. And I made them work this workbook. They're like, Mom, we thought we had enough. You asked us a million times if we were abused as kids, if anyone ever touched hell. Now we're in college and we got to work on resiliency, really? But I love this workbook. I can't claim it or own it, but it's great. It has this great summary guide. I worked this with Tulane students. They loved it. For your own families, for the kids you serve, just consider checking it out. It's a great, great book on resiliency and how to overcome this. But we're not going to do that today, so we can do it. I do believe in my heart, I'm not just saying this because you invited me here today. I truly do believe that resiliency starts with each and every one of you. It starts tomorrow morning when you go in your office and the first family or child that you see, whether it's the non-offending parent or the child, it starts with your trauma-informed response. And what we say or do, our behavior right there is the seed. It's their journey to resiliency. And so I really do believe that we have to start with actually training, because a lot of folks don't know what to say. They know if they come into a clinical setting, how to handle that. They know if I have to investigate this case, what to do. But in that initial approach, that initial response can have lasting impressions. And so if a kid gets brave enough, your child, a child you serve, is brave enough to tell you their deepest and darkest secret, are you prepared to respond? And I would venture to say, most of you would say absolutely yes. But I would venture to say that most of the people you know in this non-maltreatment world would say, I would be clueless. I don't know what I would do. I guess I would ask them, well, are you telling the truth? Or crazy questions, right? And so we need to help people learn this, all right? And so what I have found is I like to use the analogy. What if you do, if you approach a child and they tell you, okay, so you approach a child, you're walking in your house and some neighborhood kid says, I know you do that child abuse stuff, ma'am, sir. I want to tell you my dad put his pee-pee in my pee-pee last night. Okay, now in that moment you're like, I'm home, I took my workout off, I can't deal with this. This is not really happening to me, right? I have to cook dinner. I have to take care of my own kids. I do this at my office. Call me tomorrow. This is my phone number. But in that moment, okay, and that's real. That's, you know, that's real. I get it. But at the same time, in that moment, you have to be prepared. And so what I urge you, and I hope that you can help inspire others, is that in that moment, you need to act like you're on fire. And what are you supposed to do if you're on fire? Okay, so you don't have to roll, but you gotta stop, all right? You gotta stop what you're doing, all right? You gotta stop looking at your phone. You gotta stop going, no, not today, no, not today. Okay, I got too much to do, all right? We all have too much to do. You gotta drop to eye level. Whether it's your grandmother telling you from her wheelchair, you gotta drop to eye level or lower. You gotta make yourself smaller. You gotta be present, right? And in that moment, you have to listen. And there are some things that survivors tell us over and over that they wish someone would have said. So I'm going to give my voice a rest for a second. Research tells me from an adult learning model that this is not degrading, that if I get you to read these out loud, you're going to remember them, okay? So play along with me. Research told me to do this. This wasn't my idea. So what should you do when you stop, drop, and listen? What is it that we need to say in that moment? What should I say? Come on, y'all can do better. Let's do it. You. What? And I just want to say for a moment, if any of you are childhood survivors, child sexual abuse, child physical abuse, witnessed domestic violence, had a parent that was incarcerated, I am so sorry that happened to you. Because I know from this research, it can be the type of adverse experience that can disrupt your health. But here's the good news. I also know that with the right therapeutic services, that we can lessen the harm, that we can help you, that we can overcome this, and that we can actually retrain your brain to be resilient, to overcome that adversity. And that is why you do this work. And that is the seed. And it doesn't take long to plant that seed. Now, what's wrong with asking these questions? It's totally blaming, okay? And, you know, this one is just absolutely dumb, okay? Are you telling the truth? But I can't tell you about in how many schools I go into when that child first says, my grandma beat me up, she put all these marks, and they're like, are you telling the truth? Your grandma's a really nice lady. How does that child feel? That's a natural response. When I go into schools, the first response is really blaming and shaming. How does that child feel? Absolutely not believed. Now, secondly, this question does not work, okay? It doesn't work with our spouses. It doesn't work with our own children. It just doesn't work, okay? Are you telling me the truth? No one said after that, nope, okay? It didn't even work for Perry Mason, okay? Perry Mason did a lot of things to get people to confess on the stand. I don't know how, but he did it. But he never said, are you telling the truth? And the defendant said no, okay? It's just a dumb question. Just wipe it from your brain, okay, first and foremost. Now, what's wrong with this? We know that kids delay, they delay, they delay. We tell them 1,001 times. Tell me, if anyone ever touches you, you can tell me. If anyone ever touches you, you can tell me. I told my kids 1,001 times, okay? What's wrong with this question? It dishonors their bravery. There's so many. There are people in this room who have never told. Now, I'm going to tell you guys one personal story. All right, so I was a prosecutor for a number of years. I was in New Orleans when we had a lot of clergy cases early. Now we've reduced that significantly. But I prosecuted some priests. Now, I'll just, by way of just acknowledging it, I'm Catholic. I grew up Catholic. New Orleans is a very highly Catholic community. I went to church my whole life. But after I prosecuted some priests, I kind of soured and I stopped going to church. Well, I know, and you shouldn't do that. I get it. But at some point, I did. But I sent my son to a Jesuit school, an all-Catholic school, and I worked very closely. I now work incredibly closely. I actually got Catholic Graduate of the Year, and I'm on their safe environment, and I do a lot. And I go to church now all the time, so in case you guys think I lost the faith, I'm back, all right? But here's the deal. So I can tell you that part of the story so you understand, because I don't want to insult anyone who's Catholic. But my son's going to this Catholic school, and he starts, and he was the littlest kid. He was the second to littlest kid in his class. He's really short. We're short people. Or short stature. But, and great things come in little packages. I've told him his whole life. But here's the deal. And so he goes to this school. He's in 8th grade, and he goes into this school, and they say, we're going to see the Pope. Now, this is the old Pope, not the new Pope, okay? But you know what? You're a really good kid, and we're going to invite you as an 8th grader because you were in advanced religion, and you're going to go with all the older students to go to Barcelona for World Youth Day. Bring this consent form home, have your parents sign it. Comes home, I look at it, and I'm like, oh, wow, this is great. I've always wanted to go to Spain. I called the school, and I said, oh, I'd like to be a chaperone. And they're like, oh, we don't have any moms on this trip. I said, well, that's unfortunate, but then his dad will come. Well, we don't have any dads on this trip. I'm like, who are the chaperones? The priest. Okay? Now, so here I am with this dilemma, right? Now, my son says, Mom, and he's good at this, Mom, I am being abused by the work you do. Nobody else is asking about who's the chaperones, okay? And he goes, so I want all the priests, I'm going to do a background check. I want to know the kids they've been around. I want to know where they've been. Have they been from other parishes? I mean, I do all this stuff. But I agree he's going to go. And it was contrary, and you couldn't bring a cell phone, okay? But I was convinced he needed a cell phone on this trip, right? So I get him a cell phone, I get a backpack, I sew a pocket into this backpack, okay? Because he's gonna get like detention, or he's gonna get kicked, you know, it's bad if he has a cell phone. So I tell him where his secret cell phone is, and I pre-program the numbers of the Barcelona and Madrid Rape Crisis Network in case that would be needed information, okay? Now, so we're totally prepared. I do other things that they don't teach you in Stewards of Children. I was on the board of Darkness to Light. They do not teach you to buy Gap pants, sew up the fly so you can't wake up and someone's touching you, okay? But I did that, okay? Now you gotta remember, I have some secondary trauma. I've worked really hard. My kids are not gonna get an A score, okay? That's my goal, right? Now here's the deal. He gets to Barcelona. At some point, he actually calls my office. My secretary answers the phone. She's like, Trey, oh my goodness, how you doing? Your mom's been so, oh, she's going to be so excited. Goes, Miss Natasha, see if she gave me a cell phone, and I'm lost in Spain, and she didn't put my chaperone's number in the cell phone. She only put these Rape Crisis Network numbers. Now, he really did get lost, and he was found, and he sent me a text, lost, you know, I'm like, oh my goodness. But here's the deal. When I picked this kid up at the airport, all right, and I was never so glad, he stunk, but I was never so glad to see him. Okay, I don't think he ever changed his clothes. But when I picked him up at the airport, and he ran up to me, he'd sent me postcards. And I had actually put the postcards in the backpack so he would send them. And he did send them to me, and he signed it. And actually, he bought one, which I was really impressed. He actually bought one. It was the Pope and the Pope Mobile, and he said, Mom, I'm having the greatest time. Nothing about the Pope or anything Catholic, but all the stuff he ate and the weird stuff. And he signed it, NPC Trey. And I love you, NPC Trey. So I picked him up in the airport. He goes, Mom, did you figure out what NPC meant? I said, no, what did it mean? He goes, no penal contact. Now, all right, I'm sorry, I confess. Now here's the thing, he's in college now. He does not let me to tell this story in my community, but I figured none of you guys are going to run into him. So he's down south, so I can thank you for inviting me because I can still tell that story. But here's the deal, and I say that story not because I'm a great mom, because that was dumb, but here's the part. If that kid told me he was sexually abused, what's the first thing I'd be thinking? Why didn't you tell me? I'd be thinking it, okay? I'm telling you, you can't think that, right? You got to start by believing. But this one, we'd all be thinking it. And there's no research that says because we tell our kids to tell, they're going to tell. They're going to tell when they're ready to tell, right? It's on their time. And if I said to that son, my son, who I've told 1,000,001, I mean, this kid's been tortured with it, right? But if I said to him, why didn't you tell me? Is that in any way helpful? And it's increasing that adverse childhood experience. No one ever says to a child who says, my mom died, why'd your mom die? You know, we say we're sorry that happened. And it's that trauma-informed response that we have that builds this resiliency. So incredibly important to understand that we know that they deserve our trauma-informed response. And so how can you, as this county, okay, I meant to say parish, but in this county, how can you build a trauma-informed community? And it can be done. And so one of the things that's hopping up, and I'm hearing you guys are doing a great job with schools, and Mona's telling me about the work that y'all are doing, it's awesome, but trauma-informed schools. We now know that taking a kid who's traumatized, does their behavior look excellent? Nope. Do they sometimes act out their trauma? Yep, 100% of the time, okay? That's why they go from foster home to foster home. Do they do this in their schools? And what do schools do? They suspend them, so they disconnect them from their community. And so we now realize that our schools have got to be trauma-informed, and we got to teach our teachers what you already know. And so we can actually, by doing this, we can decrease and we can create that resiliency. Now, what I think is interesting, last night I just kind of grabbed this. We have charter schools. We're the state where charter schools, like, boom. I mean, like, after Katrina, they saved us with charter schools. They shut down all our public schools and they did charter schools. Our charter schools tended initially to have high discipline, okay? Longer days, less recess, lots of education. And scores, yeah, they went up. But trauma went up too, and there was no trauma-informed response. So now we're working, we have pilots in all of our charter schools are now saying, not why did you do that? Instead, tell me what's going on. And instead of being sent to suspension, they're sent to a counseling offices. Do kids need consequences? Yes, absolutely. We're not saying that this is like do away and it's like a food fast or something, food fight, but this is truly about giving a trauma-informed response. And I'm glad to hear that in New Jersey you guys are doing a lot. But when a school realizes the impact of trauma and understands the potential for resiliency training and changing that kid's brain, you can reduce this trauma. You can actually do something. And that punishment alone, just the consequences, negative consequences, don't really teach, and they don't deal with the source of the trauma. Make sense? All right, I got lots of nodding heads, so I'm not going to beat this in. But I love this. I am obsessed with this. So I join everything I can to find out what other states are doing and say, okay, we got a long way to go. We got to do this in Louisiana. We got to do this. We got to do this. And lots of states are leading the way. But I wanted to make sure I threw this in. I got to present at a social work conference on poverty because we have a high poverty. The state of Louisiana is different than New Jersey, but actually the city of New Orleans has the same kind of crazy disparities that you guys are dealing with. We have wealthier families living next to really, really poor families, and incredible disparity. So I kind of understand a little bit, and I don't in any way pretend to know anything about walking in your shoes. But we need to know, what can we do for our families that are struggling with poverty to increase their resiliency? Because we know they have high trauma scores, right? And how can we improve our response? You're doing that through your CACs. So really important. So how can you stay updated? You asked me to come here to be updated. So I can give you a couple of things. I'm going to tell you about the newest ACE hot off the presses, okay? The hardest one for anyone to swallow yet. But how can you stay updated? This is my favorite way, and I encourage each and every one of you before the end of today or tomorrow morning, before you get into the groove again or get back into the, doing the work, join ACES Connection. It's free, and it's going to send you a daily email. However, this email is sort of like my social connection. I love this email. Because not only every day does it send me, and this is just yesterday I did this. This is every day. I read these. There's lots of emails I don't read. I read these because when you click on it, it actually gives you things that help you. It always has a part about helping the helper so that you can take the hard work you're doing today and put it into practice long term. And you can have the current and latest and greatest research and know what's going on. So consider joining this particular piece. The other thing I want to tell you about is staying up to date. I am on the board of the American Professional Society on Abuse of Children. I want to make a plug where they actually have their conference every 2 years. Guess where? New Orleans, yes! Oh, imagine that. And so here's the deal. I want to invite each and every one of you to become a member, or even if you don't want to become a member, you don't want to pay the fee, you can still come to the conference. We have a second line. We have a real parade. We actually throw beads. It is really fun. I coordinate that part. They call me the social chairman of the board. But the other thing that's really important is by becoming a member, you have access to the latest and greatest of what's going on. And we have a brand new group called YAPSAC, okay? And our young professionals came up with that name, not me. I thought it was a little yappy, but they like it. And if you're a young professional, come tell me if you don't like it. But what we found is that we're given a code so they can join very, very, very inexpensive so that they can be connected. Because when I look out here, we need to make sure the next generation knows how to do this work. Does that make sense? So please encourage the young professionals you work with. We realized that was a missing link. So many of us are in the rut of doing this work. We're not training the next generation. And with my CAS course, I found out that there was 100 students out there, brilliant students, who wanted to know more about this and be about this. So they helped develop this. So please know that you can know more about this on a daily basis. All right, what's the latest? Anybody know what's the latest and greatest ACE? They added an ACE. Anybody know what it is? So what I've done in doing these presentations, and I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly, but when I've done these presentations, if I stop now, you actually will give me a higher evaluation score than when I tell you what the next ACE is, okay? So I am not responsible for this becoming an ACE, okay? I actually experienced this ACE as a child. I had wonderful parents. I won the lottery of parents, okay? I don't mean financially. I just mean loving, nurturing family, okay? But the reality is, Dr. Folletti went back and looked at all his research with Liz Gershoff, the leading researcher in this field. And they looked at it and they realized they missed an ACE. They had called it physical abuse, which was hitting of a child that resulted in injury. And what they realized is that there's another ACE. Now, some of us only have this ACE, okay? So we don't have the comorbidity, and we may not have the long-term harms. But because we may have actually contributed to doing this ACE to our own children, you get defensive, okay? So this is my lead up. Anybody know now what this ACE is? Huh? Corporal punishment. Yes, guess what? They came out with this article that they realized that when they went back and they looked at Folletti's stuff, he actually asked, had you ever been spanked as a child? And that the correlation was as much as sexual abuse. And so now, hitting kids, even if it doesn't result in any physical, physical harm to the skin, they're saying it's harmful. Now, don't feel bad if you hit your kid. We didn't know. My mom didn't know, okay? We didn't know, all right? Now, my parents are like, Stacie, we've always wondered if people thought like we abused you, but now you're talking about spanking, and, you are the way you are. You are who you are. You turned out okay. Now, my favorite thing to say to that is, we'll never know how good I could have been, okay? So the latest is, all right, so look at this. Here is weird stuff. So I'm going to show you the studies, and this afternoon, if you want to come talk about this, and you want to have the hard conversation, and you don't believe in this, come to my lecture, because I love talking about spanking, okay? Because now it's like being a prosecutor again. It's like being up against total adversity. You should see when I do this with NOPD. So look at this study. This was done at Harvard Medical School. At Harvard, do we go batteryless? I'm going to have to stand at a podium. Hello. Nope. Maybe not. That's okay. They're going to get. Can you guys in the back hear me? Yes, yes. Okay, so at Harvard Medical School, they looked at the brains of adults, young adults, and they actually showed, look at this is crazy. They looked at the brains of kids who had been, as young adults, had been spanked compared to ones who hadn't. Now notice it says harsh physical discipline. So first when I looked at that, I'm thinking, well, I wasn't harshly physical discipline. I was just spanked, or whatever you word, whooped, tapped, slapped, whatever it is. People use all kind of great cognitive dissonance words, but ultimately the definition in Webster is the same, whether you call it tapping, or you call it fussing, or you call it whooping or spanking. It's the hitting of children, right? So here's the deal. So they defined it. They said that to be in this study, in order to be in this study, you had to have been spanked more than 12 times a year. Now we know from the studies, people are spanking way more than that. Most homes, they spank about 2 times a week. So, but this is, you just had to be spanked 12 times a year. At some time, they had to have used a belt or an object, maybe a slipper. So at some point, they might have picked up, some object and hit the kid. So if they hit them once with an object, and they were spanked just 12 times in any year, and it had lasted for 3 years. So if they were only spanked, 1 year, they were excluded. That is what harsh physical discipline was. So they looked at those brains compared to the people who had never, ever been hit. And so what they found is there was a 19.1% in the right medial frontal lobe, less, 14.5% in left medial, 16.9% in the anterior. And these areas, now I'm no brain expert, okay, I just know how to read this stuff off the slide. But like literally, these areas, that's like the IQ part, okay? So what they realize, and look, they can see it. Now I'm no radiologist, but that's what they tell me. You can see it, okay? So here's the deal. What they actually showed, that's where these studies came from. People are spanking the gray matter out of their kids. How about that? That is so hard to hear. Because if you ever hit your kids, you're like, whoa. And what they realized is that they actually, you hit that hard, and it's causing this toxic stress, that gray matter's getting small, and so their IQs, when they compared them, were different. Hard to hear, okay? Now, do kids need consequences? Yes. Do they need guidance? If we just tell parents, don't hit your kids, is that going to help with behavior? We've got to give them alternatives, and we're going to be talking about that this afternoon and making sure that we deal with this. I also want you to know, significant amount of studies, the Liz Gershoff study, which is a meta-analysis of over 1,574 studies on spanking, concluded it's not helpful, okay? And it concluded it causes lots of bad things. The reason why this is significant, the reason why I include this, is because look at the number one thing it's correlated with. What is the number one thing it's correlated with? Physical abuse, the work that we do. Most parents, think about your cases, most parents just don't say like, I don't like you, kid, and I'm going to beat you today. They hit their kids for discipline. And in the act of discipline, they lose it. So the first time that kid says, that didn't hurt, what's a parent got to do? Hit them harder. The first time that child is old enough to wiggle away, we're designed by evolution to get away from sources of pain. The first time that child's able to run away, what's the parent got to do? Run after them. Force, velocity, acceleration, this is basic physics. They get injured, they show up in your community. So we're going to have to deal with this. We're going to have to deal with this. And so study after study, no matter where you get your news, whether you call one fake or the other, it all says the same, okay? It all says. And child maltreatment has said, guess what? Social norms, our social norms. If we grew up in a culture where people spanked a lot, we think it's okay. And because we do, because if right now at your table you told the story about when you were spanked as a kid and people laugh, that's a social norm. So
So people told the story at your table about the time that your spouse hit you. Would people laugh? No, because that's not a social norm. That's shifted. We don't condone that anymore. We think that's bad. But there aren't 1,200 studies that say actually hitting an adult causes all this bad stuff. Now, I'm not in any way saying it's not bad. It should be bad. But there's all these studies that hitting little people is bad for their brain. And that what we need to realize is that there's better ways. So as a result, and I know it'll be a long time before Louisiana, I know about here in New Jersey, the CDC changed the definition of physical abuse. As a result of all this science, the CDC says, guess what? Hitting children is abuse. It used to say at the very end of this that resulted in injury. It's gone. There's no part about resulting in injury. So APSAC now has a statement that we are going to have to, if we're going to address child maltreatment, we're going to have to tackle this subject. And so I want to leave you with a challenge. Now what we're doing, 30 children's hospitals across the country have developed no-hit zones. We don't want to incarcerate parents who spank, right? Because a lot of us could go to jail. I don't want my parents to go to jail. But no-hit zones are sort of like a ban. If you light up a cigarette in a restaurant, nobody's running over and making a citizen's arrest. But people are going to look and stare and say, oh, you can't smoke here, right? Simple signs that say no-hit zones shift cultural norms. It's not about arresting people, and we got to think about it different. So in our community, we created an entire campaign. You can like us on Facebook called Dear Parents, and we now use our pediatricians. I'm going to tell you more about that later. We know that this crosses races. We got to stop saying that there's just certain races that hit their kids. Notice in Child Trends, there are more white, non-Hispanic fathers who believe in a good hard spanking starting at toddler than there are African American mothers than there are Hispanic parents. The only race where in our country it is no longer a cultural norm, doesn't mean that all parents don't do it, is Asian. So, and what do people believe about Asian students, or children? That they're more disciplined, that they're getting the least amount of physical discipline. I hate to promote stereotypes, but we hear this all the time. So when it comes to your community in poverty, we do know families in poverty, that all families typically spank and approve of it across races, but that there's absolutely more. So this afternoon we're going to be talking about painless parenting. I'm not going to talk about our trafficking work today and what we're doing with this and being trauma informed, but I do want to end with this. We have a group, our RWES, our Institute for Ethnic Studies, created an entire campaign called hashtag, and I'd love for you guys to join us, Sad Not Bad. Because the kids you serve, many of them are sad, not bad. And so we need to help them on this journey become more trauma informed and start by reporting. So we realize this is one of our talking babies from our Talking Baby campaign. I've called the cops and they're on their way. If he could, he would. Children can't speak up for themselves. That's why you have to. And so I thank you. I honor the work that you do. I appreciate you and would love for you to join us, see us on Facebook. And I'm sorry you have to take your break 15 minutes late, but thank you so much for inviting me to New Jersey.